So what I wanted to do today before we press on into new ground, I wanted to give this. We had the review 2 weeks ago.
Do you want tea?
Nah, it's all right. Oh, questions, everything we've covered. What do you got? What are you thinking? What are the thinky thoughts?
Thinky thoughts?
What are the thinky thoughts?
Money.
Money. I'm only thinking.
Yes.
Okay. You said, I think in the first class, if you don't understand what love looks like in this world and in the after world, you won't understand love, but you do in this world. When you get there, you'll get it. So.
That sounds intimidating. I said that.
Yeah, you did. You
Yes,
really did.
I really did.
Quotes.
Yeah.
Rabbi Bender.
Scare quotes. Okay, yeah.
So, what if someone, let's say someone really doesn't, appreciate God's love in this world, never sees it, hates it. When they get up to Shemayim, they won't feel it, they won't see it, even if they feel it in this world. God won't show them.
Here's a bit different. There's two parts to that question.
Yeah.
Okay, one part is the Chelek and Olam Haba part. To be able to have a Chelek and Olam Haba, you have to more or less buy into the 13 principles of faith. My other class I teach. You guys have looked those up? The Rambam's Yud Gimel Ikrim?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's the base standard for Chelek and Olam Haba stuff. That's the starting position that enables a person to do the love research.
It's called
The 13 principles of faith, yeah. So that's number one. So you can totally, have been able to sort that one out and still feel pretty bitter towards God. The second part, that's a tough one. That's just a tough one. Reminds me of a client I have where what she's suffering is she has obsessive compulsive disorder. And it's really hard to treat, first of all, because basically what the problem is, if you imagine this as a human experience of life, people who are suffering from OCD are down here, meaning they are focusing on or experiencing a very, very small portion of what can be experienced in life. If you want to more or less have mental health, you want to be up here. You want to have the broadest experience of life you can. That sounds good, but that means you have to be willing to experience the pain along with the good stuff. You have to be willing to really, really think about bad and good simultaneously. And we are avoidance machines. We do not want to do that. That's what every person is. It's an avoidance machine. I'm an avoidance machine. You guys are avoidance machines. That's just the way we roll. And so someone like that is looking at life through a very, very small hole. And it's legitimate. It's not true that a person would be having those thoughts and feelings, that type of suffering. But the reason why it doesn't change is because there's such a small focus on their experience that they're never able to find the solutions they need to leave that experience. That you have to be willing to feel the full gamut of problems as well as pleasures in life. To be able to, I almost imagine it as a very long hall with doors on both sides. And these buildings where when you move forward, the lights turn on. So if you don't move forward, the lights will be off. You will not see these doors. These doors are the solutions to the problems that you can figure out. But if you're not willing to walk down that hall, you'll never even see that there are potential solutions to begin with. So someone like that, where all they're feeling is upset at God or how they've been betrayed, that's a very narrow, and again, I'm not saying it in a derogatory way, but it's not taking the full view of what life is. So they're never able to figure out the solutions to those legitimate problems they're experiencing. You have to walk down the hall. So those are two different things. Those are two different things. You can live a life of suffering and still have a chelek olam haba. It's just like, man, you wasted your life suffering. Why did you do that? Yeah.
Well, what happens if they're kind of like led there as opposed to them knowing any better?
No.
Like, how can they find it if they're continuously being led astray?
I don't believe anybody is a victim. And that's sort of like being led astray. I have a thing in my gut that's like, ugh. It's like, wait a second, that sounds too much like victim to me.
Okay.
But it's also true. Like, we actually are victims. Just because I don't like it doesn't mean it's not true. Like life's hard. And so it's like, well, yeah, that's true. It's just like, you might be a victim right now, but that doesn't mean that tomorrow you have to be. And I think gets into like personal agency. Like, I really do believe there's something you can always do. I mean, you guys ever hear of the book, The Gulag Archipelago? Yeah, of course we read that one. Yeah.
Last week?
Yeah, we read it last week. Solzhenitsyn, he was a Russian, he was in World War II, he fought for Stalin, and because what was going on in White Russia at the time, everybody is a potential enemy of the state, he ended up in the Gulag Archipelago. They basically make the concentration camps look like a gun. It was horrible. And he, in that experience, suffered tremendously. I mean, I forget how many decades he was in Siberia. And so he wrote 3 books on his experiences of all the atrocities that he saw. So it's like, anyone who could claim being a victim, he's that guy. You know, like nightmares, this book. And something that like really shook me reading it was he basically swore to himself that he wouldn't allow himself to ignore the role he played in the suffering he was receiving. It's like, he wasn't guilty. He wasn't at fault. He wasn't a bad guy. And like, Stalin is the biggest, most horrible person who have ever lived. I mean, you can make a fair argument, like, he's that guy. So it's like, for him to be able to step back and say, nevertheless, I have something to learn about how I made mistakes in my life. How did I end up here? Not how did they put me there. That's a very dramatic shift of how you look at your life. Yeah. So it's like, yeah, we're victims. Like, he was a victim, But at the same time, you have it within you, if you're a living, breathing, thinking person, to be able to look at your life in that way. Where did I make missteps, and how could I improve myself? That's always a door you can walk through.
Okay. I like that answer.
And now you have an interesting book to read.
What's it called?
I've heard of it.
The Gulag Archipelago. The Gulag Archipelago.
Perfect. Tell
Can
us
you
the
just repeat
librarian.
the last thing you
Instantly
said
find
about
it.
we have to have the mindset of what?
We have to always have the mindset that no matter what happened to us, that we have to really, really look at how we found ourselves there. What did we do to get there? So I mean, I know, like this one, I hate these. It's like women who end up in horrible marriages. Like, you don't wish that up on anybody, but it's like they ended up there somehow. Like they didn't see something. And that's not to say they're at fault. Those are 2 very different statements. It's like, you didn't see something, you missed signs, and there's a reason why you missed it. You're not bad for missing it. We all miss things. Like, that's not the point. It's like, you got there somehow. So figure out how you got there so you don't do it again. Protect yourself. Because no one's going to protect you. Like, basically. People can try to protect you, but like at the end of the day, the buck stops with you guys. That's all. So I give you a bracha. You should get married and have a husband who wants to protect you, and that's great, and you all deserve it, and that's wonderful. But just because you deserve it doesn't mean you're gonna get it. So like, you gotta earn it. You gotta earn it. But you will. And I think I like knowing you guys, like you're doing a great job. Just keep it up. That's all you got to do. Just keep it up. Yeah.
Okay, so remember how we were talking about ideology versus religion?
Yeah.
How do you know when you're making an actual balance of it? Because I feel like someone could try to make it into such a balance that they end up making it into an ideology in a different way.
Yeah.
So how do you manage to balance that?
This is a cool area of research. This is called intersectionality, where I'm going to share it this way. This is a cool idea. When you look at who you are, or like what your identity is, let's say. You're white women. Well, you're not black men. So there's opposites in terms of ways of defining people, and they're not fair and they're not accurate. It's like there's 1,000 ways to look at yourself. So like the moment you fall into this trap of you're thinking things are either you're a woman or a man, although you are, it's like, okay, like, but that's not all you are. Like there's a lot of different identities you have. These Russian dolls that are inside dolls. It's a good way of thinking of yourself. Like there's lots of things about you. So it's almost like in order to not fall into an ideology, you have to start figuring yourself out first. Like you use yourself as a map. So it's like figuring out who you...
I feel like there's many ways to figure yourself out.
Yes. So make a list. Like keep it going. Like 100%. Like you'll never reach the bottom. But if you can make but just by knowing you're like this Russian doll and you're keeping track of it, there's a different ways of thinking of it also. Like you can look at yourself and try and define yourself based on your emotional states. Who are you when you're angry, when you're happy, when you're sad, when you're disgusted? And like really boil down, how do you act differently in those cases? Try and figure out another way of looking at your identity is the rules that you create for yourself, the story that you tell yourself. And then there's a final level where you're the thing that sees your rules and sees your story. It's almost like if you can like look at your life as a game of chess, and you have the white pieces and the black pieces. Like those are the things that happen in your life. Those are the feelings and your stories and the rules that you create for yourself. So what are you? You're the board. If you can look at your life like you're the board, that's another way of looking at who you are.
Do you think you ever get to the point where you can figure yourself out? Like when you're done? Or
No.
is it...
That's the fun of it.
So fun.
Yeah. That's the fun of it, man. So just like, so like to answer your question is like you have to start with yourself first. You have to like really your project. This also happens to be you're in luck. You're Jewish. It's like the one way of looking at halacha is value, judgments, and meaning in the world and every object and every moment, and you are the medium by which you create and observe meaning. It's like there's a hand, there's a pencil, and there's what you write. You're the pencil. Meaning is what you write on the page. But like that meaning will not get there without that pencil. Like you're that pencil. So the more that you can figure yourself out, the more you'll be able to feel that question of being able to sense, okay, wait a second. I'm hearing from, I gave the example a couple weeks ago of ecology, protect Mother Earth. That's a very simplistic way of looking at the world. Like, we have to make sure that we don't destroy the planet. It's like, that's half the story. The other half is Mother Nature's trying to kill you. And Mother Nature's doing a really good job of trying to kill you. And both are true. It's like, you have to not destroy the planet, but don't let the planet destroy you. And those are...
Survival of the fittest.
It's like, you have to be able to see, but you're only going to be sensitive to the layers of meaning when you apply it to your own life. Because there's only one thing you can be sure of, is yourself. You know you. That's the only thing you can know for certain. And it's hard. It's going to be your entire life. Your entire life's mission is to know you in this way. But the more clarity you get every day, the more you're going to be able to then take that tool of being sensitive to layers of meaning and get it when someone else is trying to sell you a bag of goods or figuring out the deeper meaning around you. but it starts with you.
No pressure.
No pressure.
Okay.
Was that a good answer?
It was.
But it was like
Just
a very
lot of work to
annoying.
do
It's a lot of
now.
work to do now. I was like, oh man.
It wasn't just like, oh, yeah.
And you know what? You can make it fun for yourself. Like, a simple way. How do you, because I gave a big mountain of a mission. Look up the Big 5 personality assessment.
Did it.
Cool. So that's
did it.
So that's a starting position.
And it gave my answers. I don't think I did it right because it gave me a lot better answers than like. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Me and Sammy did it together. I'm like, these don't make sense.
Yeah.
Because it's, I mean, in a good way. It's
Okay.
a lot healthier in the sense that I thought I was. But I
Good.
Don't.
Well, it's a good test. It's a real good test. So I mean, the Big 5 personality assessment. But what the point of that, how to use that as a tool is like, well, those 5 character traits, those are the lenses by which you look at the world. So it's like, it's good to know, like if you had a high score on neuroticism, being threat sensitive. So it's good to know, well, I look at the world as very dangerous. That doesn't mean it's dangerous. And use that to calibrate how you interpret what's going on. Like, seems like I'm above the norm with freaking out about things, so like scale it back a couple steps. And you can kind of artificially, and I think this is also the point of the Rambam in terms of the golden mean, walking the middle path. It's the same idea. It's like figure out your middos. That's what the Big 5 is. And figure out, well, how can you pull yourself towards the middle so you can
Balance yourself out.
balance yourself out.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I did the Big 5 test. I guess I'm already on my way.
Good. And it's so cool because, like, for example, like, in that test, I score very, very high on agreeability,
I did too.
right? That's dangerous.
Oh.
But they're all dangerous. It's like, yeah, because it's not like there's good personalities and bad. There's a shadow. There's going to be a downside when you're agreeable, when you're incredibly agreeable. Well, what that probably is breeding within you is a lot of resentment for people, because you're quite agreeable. You go along with other people's suggestions. You never get what you want. You're always giving, and that wears on a person. So it sounds like, oh great, I'm agreeable. It's like, well, okay, but
Wait, what does that mean? Why are you saying that means you're
Because it can lead you to being pushed over.
because it leads you to be a push. Exactly, it leads you to be a pushover. You're constantly giving, and you're resentful for it. And that's something to know. So for me, it's like, okay, like I'm agreeable, great.
I thought you meant in the
But-
sense that you don't want people to talk so much, so you just agree.
That could be all. yeah.
I love that.
That's
Does that
funny.
agree? Does that like fall into that category though?
To be agreeable, that just going along with the crowd because it's not worth fighting it out, something like that.
Because I mean, I guess that shows that it might not be a real relationship sometimes.
Yeah.
But you just agree because you don't want to argue.
Yeah, that would be another dark side to that.
So yeah.
So it's like, just, so whenever you see an extreme score in that test, it's a good indication. Let's schlep this one out towards the middle a little bit more, because it's not good to be so agreeable. It's not good to be so neurotic.
But is it good?
It's not. These things aren't
Like
all.
one of them was like your intellectual.
This is all from this class.
Okay.
Yeah.
Open.
Is it bad to get a high score on that? Like, why would that be?
Okay,
bad?
so that depends, because I mean depending upon what test you're using, there can be sub-scores of that. So men, for example, there's no difference in openness scores to men and women, but the big difference is in what are they open to. Women are more open when it comes to relationships, whereas men are more open and interested to ideas. So that's a tough one to navigate in a relationship, because guys are obsessed with ideas and really fixate on. I mean, that was my first class with my, obsessing about the how to give the Pesach offering. It's like I was too obsessed with that idea, but not enough, not open enough to the relationship. So that's where it would get hairy with other people. So it'll depend. It depends who you're with. If you're a guy sitting in yeshiva, it's great to be obsessed with ideas. But if you're sitting at home with your wife, no, that's a horrible idea. Like, you guys are just going to irritate each other.
By ideas, do you mean? Could you also mean stereotypes?
Yeah, what do you mean?
Like, because I don't fully get what you mean when you say ideas. So.
Like facts, data, Useless trivia. Guys are into that. More so than women, generally speaking.
Sports stats.
Sports stats, yeah.
Oh, you like sports? Name every sports member ever knows the name.
The Lions, the Tigers,
The Bears.
the
Oh
Bears.
my.
Oh my.
What was your question?
Well, my question, 10 minutes ago,
Yeah.
you said in order to not fall into an ideology, you have to know yourself, but won't you always have an ideology because you always think?
It's
That's bias.
yeah, for sure. But there again, knowing that makes it less likely you will be biased.
I just want to ask, by ideology, do you mean bias?
A good way of defining ideology is half the story.
Oh.
Like in my example of conservation, save Mother Earth. That's half the story.
But if we save Mother...
The other half is Mother is trying to kill you. Maybe you do have to cut down the rainforest to not starve to death. Because it's no, I mean it's really interesting because people really get, you reading on this topic, people say some very vicious stuff about slashing and burning. It's okay, yeah, that's creating a lot of pollution, fair enough. But if the people living in Brazil don't do that, their children die and so do they. It's you have to be able to hold both. It's you know what I'm saying? It's not just simple as don't slash and burn, because you don't want people to suffer and starve either. So that's what I mean by both sides of that story.
So how are you supposed to balance that? But never mind, because that's just a science question.
Yeah.
I just have problems with that. Because do you feel like the Mother Earth is slowly killing us, but because we're killing Mother Earth in a sense, or is it just?
Nah, she's always been trying to kill us.
No, that's not.
Well, what's interesting is that the richer countries become, the more conservation oriented they become. So it's a good strategy is to actually try and advance countries as quickly as possible, raise their GDP so they don't have to worry about dying. As soon as a country stops worrying about dying and starving, they pay more attention to conservation. It's so you.
You gotta focus on yourself before you can help the planet.
That's right. I like that. That's a good way of putting it.
Hold on, because you wrote something.
Wait, but so what's an example of an ideology?
I think a better example might be political parties. Being a Democrat or Republican, those are ideologies.
Do you think it's bad to be a part of either?
No, I don't think it's bad to be a part of either. But when you're going to be a part of one, you kind of have to. You have to be open that you need the other side.
That you're not completely right in everything.
Yeah, because both are just representing different values. For a good example of this would be liberals want to tear down borders, conservatives want to create borders. That's a classic liberal conservative debate. And so if you're more liberally inclined, and that has a lot to do with your biology, by the way. People are born more liberal or born more conservative.
Who says that?
All the research. There's three different factors that make you choose a political party, let's say. One is your basic biology. Liberals have two very, very strong moral values: fairness and equality. Not equity, equality, being the same. And conservatives have 5, but they're more broad. So they will not they won't value fairness as much, although they do. But they'll value other things like respect for authority and sanctity. So they're more diverse morally. So that's the biological level. You're born that way. It's predictive based on who your parents are. But the next step up is nurture, where you live. So it could be if you were born in California, you'd be a flaming liberal. But if you're born in Iowa, the culture in the state of Iowa is more conservative. Well, you'll still be a liberal, but you'll have more.
You have to train yourself more into being a liberal.
You'll have more conservative values will have snuck into your identity. The last level is the story you tell yourself of who you are, and that also influences. So that's these three factors are going to determine, what type of liberal are you going to be? Or maybe, I had friends who, when they were changing their life narrative, when they were in high school and going into university, they switched political parties. And a part of that was, well, they still had liberal tendencies, but they were living a different story, I think is a good way of thinking about it. So that they were voting conservative. But like you could smell it, like they were a different type of conservative, and that's those are ideologies. And so, when it comes to, liberals say you should have open borders, well, that can be a good idea, because when you have open borders, you make more money, there's better trade, there's more flow of ideas. That's great. In human history, that was going on right before the Black Death hit Europe. Because when you have open borders, guess what else comes? Disease and death. And so that's the conservative step in. And the conservative ideology is, well, yes, it's nice to know things, but you also have to protect yourself. And maybe not every idea is a good idea. And so both are right. It's just, there's no one side has a claim to the truth, but it's when you're able to have both sides come together, you have a bigger picture of the truth. That's what I mean.
Yeah. I feel like it's just being more open-minded.
To opposite ways of looking at something.
And I feel like that's on the path of knowing yourself, just looking into more things.
Yeah. Yeah. What else do we got?
Class about the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov.
Yeah.
So we had another class on Hasidut.
Yeah.
That said that it's just confusing, because I feel like there's so many different perspectives and so many different things in Judaism.
Yeah,
it's hard to know where to.
Yeah.
Like, he said that we have two souls, and it's the animalistic and the godly soul.
Yeah.
And the animalistic soul, he basically described it similar to what you said in a sense, but different. Like
Yeah.
He was like, the godly soul is what you want, is what makes you want to get close to God, and the animalistic soul is what makes you take care of your body. But the way you explained it, you said that the Yetzer Hara isn't necessarily bad. It's just that it makes us take the things we need, but then once we start taking the things we want, that's when it starts getting bad.
Yeah.
So that is more animalistic, but I don't understand how
I made it unnecessarily complex.
No, because I understood yours more than I understood his.
Yeah.
It's because when it's an animalistic soul, that's strictly meant for physical things that you need to take care of yourself. How can it be seen in a bad way when that's literally all it's there for?
This is a big problem in Judaism, because fundamentally what Judaism is trying to do is it's the research of values and how to make value judgments. And so, you're going to have a lot of very different voices in that debate. And it's a very long debate. We're talking thousands of years. So, I mentioned the 13 principles of faith earlier. Not every rabbi agrees to those. Jewish thinking, it's like you can find an opinion for everything almost.
Yeah.
Not because people are being flippant, not just because it's just willy-nilly, but it's, the striving to have a more realistic picture of reality. You're going to have contradictions in that. It's the struggle of figuring this stuff out. So, I guess, I sympathize with the problem, it's you hear a bunch of different stuff all over the place.
It's just, how do you prevent all of these different opinions from also turning into an ideology? Because when you hear all these different things, how do you know just what, I don't know, it's just really confusing with all these different things. Even with Yom Kippur in the beginning of the year, we had, one teacher say, it's the happiest day of the year, another teacher say that it's the scariest day of the year, another teacher say all these different things. How do you take it all and make it into religion, but also prevent it from being an ideology when it's all these different things telling you the exact opposite, and sometimes, they happen to be similar, but, how do you,
I have a little bit of a cheat. Is whatever anyone teaches you, when you find that you have two contradictory views, figure out what the middle position is. It's a cheat. It's not going to always generate truth, but I think 90% of the time it will. Like, take everything you're learning and try and make it all fit together somehow. I know, yeah, it's a...
I mean, yeah, I get it. Like, when you have that middle ground, it's that middle ground. It's Switzerland in a sense. But,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I feel like, yeah, I guess. It's just that there's so many different opinions and so many different people throughout Torah itself. Like, they just disagree with each other. So how can you take two opinions that are the exact opposite and hold by all of it?
Middle ground.
Yeah. I mean, it's a cheat, and I think it only helps you 1/4 of the way there.
Yeah.
In the sense that they're interesting ideas. And a part of it is trying to like play with ideas and being open to play with ideas. But like you want to then translate those ideas into like lamaisa, practically. What do you do? Keeping Shabbos. How do you keep Shabbos? It would almost kind of be like, and this is kind of what we're going to be getting into in the second half of the course, the more halachic side of things is like halacha is almost kind of like an anchor that you're well within your right to try and make a philosophical sense of halacha, but you have to always be anchored in it. So I think a really good book I would suggest you guys read. It's small. It's the 19 Letters from Rav Hirsch. I would read the 19 Letters. He very much is dancing on this idea of you have to develop a philosophy. You have to be able to play with ideas. You're going to hear contradictory things and struggle with it. But it has to be ultimately rooted in halacha. Like halacha is where you don't compromise. That's the anchor that keeps your thinking stable enough that you can come out with worthwhile beliefs. I think that's a good way of thinking about it. Because otherwise it's too disorienting. So halacha is an anchor that keeps you from losing yourself in all these very interesting, even contradictory ways of looking at the world. So like, I might say something different than somebody else, but brass tacks, you don't wear shoes on Yom Kippur, don't eat, and keep up with the davening. Like, as long as you do that, fine. Those are the things that anchor all the fun ideas that people are going to throw at you.
Okay. It's just like confusing at times when there's like several different ideas, all the complete opposite on one topic, and it's like, what am I supposed to do?
And another part of it also, the Beersheva, he's a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. He talks a little bit about this, where that in the halachic process, there's a certain point where you're logical, you're trying to line up all the different sugyas in the Gemara, you're trying to consider all the different halachic options, but there's a certain point where like you have to make a jump, and it's based on your personality. It's based on your shorish neshama. That it's just going to be, you're going to see things differently than people. And you have to do all that work leading up to that. But it's not like, oh, well, you're just completely rational and only rational thinking only rational thinking helps you arrive at halacha. It's like, no, it gets you so far, but you will be different. And so that's another thing that you're confronting is, whoever you're talking about, I'm different than him. It's not going to be the same. Yeah. And you're going to be different too. It's like you're going to gravitate towards one view as opposed to another, and that's fair enough. That's fine. Just as long as you don't eat on Yom Kippur.
Okay.
You don't say.
Yeah.
Beyonce?
All right.
I'm satisfied with that.
Cool. All right. Anything else? We're almost going to call it a day.